If like
No.
what if someone ends up having multiple children where they can't do like six? Say if somebody has like 6 kids, right? So they have different age ranges, and they were having to take care of their kids all their lives, and they can't work because they have so many kids. How does that affect them?
Well, this is an important thing where a prenup comes in. You can write that in.
We want prenup. We want prenup.
We agree. We want a large family. Or, at the end of the day, you can say, look, we agree. We want a large family. I want you to stay at home. That's what I want for you. But then just don't come crying to me when they're wanting spousal support and they're wanting child support. And how am I going to live?
But how do you even regulate that in a relationship when one person wants to be the homemaker? The other person is financially able to support the family. That's a hard conversation.
I think that you have to agree before you get married. How many kids roughly how many kids you want. I mean, things happen.
But also, I think people get married and don't necessarily know each other, because you can marry somebody that's a narcissist and you don't know it, and they want you to stay at home because they want you to be cute.
I can control you.
Right. So then now you're 20 years later and all these things have changed and you want to leave, and you don't have the career because you had kids or whatever. They just want you to stay home and be pretty or whatever the situation is.
God, I wish.
Or if nothing else, they might have some mental issues. There's a whole lot of things that you can't necessarily talk about up front. Is my point.
That's true. And then things do change over the course of marriages.
Like a will, can you change that? Can you take a prenup and update it? I guess you
modify
can update a will, right? Can you
that's called a postnuptial agreement.
Shut up.
She didn't hear about these
Go,
two.
Whitney.
Okay.
I know it. I've heard it.
Give me one of them right now.
All right,
and one thing I do recommend is that, let's say that you do find yourself in that scenario and you agree that we really don't want our children in daycare, and so once they start school, we agree that you're going to go back to work, husband or wife, other parent. That's fine. You can codify that. You can put that into an agreement. Okay. So let's say that other parent doesn't comply, and maybe I think I want to try to go get a degree in this. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, all right, couple years. We'll kind of stretch it out. It becomes important later down the road. So if that marriage does fall apart and you've got a party, because I actually had this situation in a case, and you've got that party asking for an insane amount of spousal support to go get like a 4th degree. They had it in writing when she stopped working that she was going to go back to work and contribute financially to the marriage after those kids went back to school. She didn't do it. The judge considered. He's like, look, you got 4 degrees. You have enough money to considerably contribute. Right. You both had this agreement. You defaulted on the agreement, and the judge didn't give her what she was looking for.
So in your experience, go ahead.
Oh, no, this is kind of out there. Can you put in provisions like, say someone becomes ill and they're ill for let's say they have cancer, so they're in treatment a lot, for instance, and then, you end up getting divorced anyway, whatever, that maybe they get spousal support in the event that they weren't able to be in the workforce for X number of years? Or is that am I really going down a rabbit hole?
No, that's perfectly reasonable, because people do end up with, horrible disease, lupus, MS, something that,
but they can't really be in the workforce.
Right.
So these things can literally start turning into like
what if
500-page documents,
and that's where I'm curious is that we talked about going back what we were talking about. Are people really even having these in-depth conversations, or just people are just naive in love?
I don't think I think younger people don't have these conversations. First marriages, they don't have these conversations. Second marriages, third marriages, they're having these conversations. They're talking about, they are no longer looking at this. I think you put it really well. There's the love aspect of your relationship, and then you've got marriage. Marriage is a contractual agreement. It's a business agreement, and you have to look at it, yes, while it's tied up in emotions, you have to look at it from a business perspective.
I mean, it used to be a business perspective, right? It was.
I got 20 goats. You got 20 acres.
Kingdoms, families, tribes, whatever, and it wasn't about the love. Everything was arranged.
But that's the reality of the situation is that people don't talk about that stuff. and that's why they end up in court, and that's why they end up in
that's why they end up in her office.
Yeah, that's why you end up in these offices, because
that's why she's a fluid job.
In your first marriage, there's a lot of emotions that's tied up into it. There's a, I love you, I can't see me spending the rest of my life with you type deal, right?
You're right.
And then
people also caught up in the wedding.
And then 4 or 5 years later, you're like, who are you?
You have no life experience. I mean, you might have love experience, but you have no life experience. You may not have purchased a house. You may not have retirement accounts. You may not have had to balance daycare and other financial obligations, and you're just walking into it in a very naive position.
This is where I say people. That's why we talked about before, where we left the history of it out. Like you said something very important: the institution of marriage. Marriages weren't meant. They were like we somehow we've warped what marriages really were into this Hallmark movie, right? Like everything is just we love each other. There's love, and there's just showers.
And in the end, we're gonna come together and have a perfect family.
No
bullshit.
We like the history of it was just what she was talking about. It
was contractual.
And half the time the two people get married. I don't even know you, kid, but
So in the pre-production, we talked about men getting full custody, and I said it's rare, and you said no.
In Northern Virginia, in this particular area, it is not uncommon. I can't speak to other areas of the country, and I actually do know in some other areas of the country there is more of a bias towards women. But in the Virginia Code, it is not. It is specifically written that there is no bias towards either the mother or the father. And I've seen quite a few situations where the father does get custody of the child. That is not unusual.
Is there more burden of proof on the men?
No.
That's
the issue where you're going to come into more of an issue with a father getting custody is if your child's of a tender age. So if you've got a very, very young child, it's going to be a little bit of a harder row to hoe to get that father primary physical custody. It's definitely not impossible, but it requires a little bit of extra planning, a little bit of extra laying out a plan going for the future. How are you going to handle this child? This child is very young, or particularly if they're a newborn. That becomes really complicated.
That's why I talked about. I have a friend of mine, really one of my best friends growing up. He's of course, me and my friend, I got a little bias, but he's just a hero to me because this dude, especially being we'll talk about some of this, I guess, later, race and stuff, and racial parity in this. But he, as a black dude, as a black man, he got custody of his kids when they were little. I mean, when they were little. He raised them, thank goodness son's a master's degree accountant now, and daughter's out there in the world doing her thing. I mean, and he's a good dude. And I would just, his story was so not normal. I think that's, Pat, maybe that's what you're getting, is that we don't normally hear. That's like, when I heard his story, when I lived, being around this story, I was like, wow, man, you are a hero to me, dude, because you stood up for your kids. You were the best thing that could have happened to them, and not only did you do it, you did it the right way, and you raised them all the way. I mean, he's my boy, so I love him to death, and I love, so. But I think I've heard of maybe one or two other people like that to have that situation.
That happened to my best friend too, and he's black with two different baby mamas that were white. Mm-hmm. His son was, I think, 4 when he got custody of him. His daughter was 9, and it was a struggle.
The court struggle or the struggle?
It was a little bit of a struggle. Especially, I mean, I was personally more involved with the daughter. Mm-hmm. And the second one, he was with his wife. They're separated, and they were still married, but it was with the wife, and so it was a struggle, and I was there for it. So I know what you're talking about, but he's kind of like my hero too, because how many single men? How many
single black men?
And then it was 2 different moms, so it wasn't even like it wasn't like the couple of the family. It was literally 2 separate moms. You know what I mean? But he did his homework and he did all the things that he was supposed to do. And I mean, the first one I wasn't so much involved with, but the second one I was like, oh no, this is what we're doing. I don't have any law information or anything, but I was like, these are the things we're doing. I was like, receipts, Receipts. I literally helped him. I made a book, a notebook, and I got emails. I was like, give me your email address. I was printing stuff off. I had markers in there. He didn't have to do anything. He just gave his lawyer the book and was like, here. And I put like whatever the subject matter was that I had it in there. All she'd do is flip pages. And I'd put like 25 of whatever it was. So all she'd do is flip tabs.
You are our favorite kind of person.
Paralegal.
You really are.
Yeah.
You need to be a paralegal. All right, so Whitney, I have got a couple of things that I found on Google, and I want to kind of touch on and find your opinions on it. So, study of family courts by the Custody for Change. Study shows mothers have a higher burden of proof for abuse claims and are most likely to be blamed for their abuser's actions.
I'm sorry. So repeat that
So
for
the
me.
study shows the mother have a higher burden of proof for abuse claims and are more likely to be blamed for their abuser's actions.
Oh, wow.
Okay, let me unpack that a little bit.
Right? That was deep.
Come on.
Yeah. All right, so we're talking about, yes, I would agree with that. There is a higher burden of proof on the person alleging abuse. And because you're talking about a crime, you're talking about you have to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt if you're talking about a domestic assault case. So yes, it is a matter of public policy that we don't want people to be able to go, he abused me.
Yeah,
I'm afraid of him.
So easy to say.
Yeah, it is so easy to say. And from when I used to do criminal work, I've done probably over 300, 400 domestic assault cases in my career.
Wow.
Of those cases, maybe 40% were legitimate.
Really?
That's huge.
Would you think? One second, Keith.
No,
but would you think that these allegations would be brought up in family court not as a criminal, but is used as leverage?
Absolutely, and that's where that 60% comes from. It's a tool for control. It's a tool to get a leg up in custody.
Mm-hmm.
I can't.
Do they have to prove that claim, or just the allegation alone is enough?
The allegation alone of
abuse.
Well, I say, can I expand on that a little bit? Like saying, when you said that, you just said abuse. If they're bringing it up, right, it doesn't have to be physical. Like they could be talking about emotional, mental, like
financial.
What is the like? There's a difference between burden of proof on these things. It's got to be right.
There is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're talking about physical abuse, you're talking about domestic assault. And that is a crime, obviously. In Virginia, it's a Class 1 misdemeanor. And if there's serious injury involved, it becomes felony. So that is a different level of proof. So you've got, to unpack it all, you've got the domestic assault piece, which is the criminal charge. Somewhere in the middle of these two things is a protective order. Protective orders usually go with the domestic assault charges, but you can get a protective order without any kind of domestic assault charges. Mm-hmm. So that's not necessarily, it doesn't always go with the domestic assault. Well, it does always go with domestic assault, but it doesn't have to have a domestic assault component in order to get that protective order. And then you've got, like you were talking about, just allegations. Right. I never called the police. I never requested a protective order. But we all know there are multiple forms of abuse. Oh, yeah. And some of it can have nothing to do with physical. Financial, controlling finances, narcissism, emotional abuse, name-calling, criticizing.
Intimidation.
Absolutely. So that is a different level of proof. You know, if you've got a crime, you've got it beyond a reasonable doubt. Right. If you've got an allegation of abuse as grounds of divorce, you're talking about clear and convincing evidence. Right. And that's still a high standard of proof, but it's not up there with beyond a reasonable doubt. So, yes, you do have to prove that. You just can't throw the allegation out. Yeah.
That's it.
So the next case study. The parent with the most money can afford better lawyers and have a leg up in court. The abusers might gain access to victims who are mostly women during a family court case.
I'm not really following the second part of that. Yes, I would agree with you. The person that has the greater access to financial resources, they're going to be able to, while they may not get a better lawyer, certainly, money doesn't equate better lawyer. I have to give a plug out to public defenders in Northern Virginia area. Those are some really good attorneys. Just because someone isn't paid, $550 an hour doesn't mean that they're not any good. And also legal aid attorneys. There's some fabulous legal aid attorneys. There's attorneys that do things pro bono and for modest means, and they're good attorneys. They just don't feel that they feel like a moral, ethical responsibility to take cases on for people that can't afford. So, but yes, if you've got greater access to funds, you're going to be able to do the custodial evaluator with a psychiatrist to see if there's any kind of parental alienation going on, because those are like $30,000. You're going to be able to do the vocational expert with $6,000. You're going to be able to get these tools in your toolbox that your average person on an average income just can't afford.
Right. I'm sorry, I'm going to stop you there because the next, you just forget about the abusers thing because we were just talking about it. But you just said something that was my next, because when I was writing this down, I was like, I've never heard of this term. Courts that recognize parental alienation syndrome might open the door to the abusers, the abusive father weaponizing their claims against mothers. What is parental alienation syndrome?
Parental alienation is where you've got one parent who has essentially launched a campaign to destroy the relationship between the child and the other parent. And it can be subtle and it can be aggressive. It can be as simple as, your mother's such a pain in my... it can be, that's a form of parental alienation. You're talking negatively about the other parent in front of that child, and you're coloring this child's perspective. And after you've heard something, 500 times, oh, your dad's a piece of crap, over and over and over and over again, you start viewing things through that lens.
That narrow lens.
Especially when you're young and impressionable.
Right. And then it can be very aggressive and very obvious of... perfect example, I can't give a lot of details, but one instance, father was trying to be involved. Mother and her family had talked down about the father, he abandoned you. None of that was true. But the child was young enough to not
question what was being said.
Right. Was still kind of walking right. Okay, this is what my mom and my grandma and my aunts are all saying. Okay, this has got to be true. Husband was sending flowers to the child's dance recital and everything like that. Mom would throw them away.
Please tell me he kept the receipts.
Or the worst one is where they
he just gave up.
Where they accuse one of the parents of like physical or sexual abuse, right?
Oh,
and then convince the kid to like.
And that happens. I've had to go several times to Child Protective Services as part of an investigation where mom or dad. I've never had it happen with dad making the allegation.
I'm sure I got this from like Law and Order. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so where mom has made an allegation and taken a small child in for a SANE exam and that sexual assault nurse examiner exam, and put the child through physical and emotional trauma
to get their
try to get a leg up, just to try to jab at them. Here's one extra thing.
We are such an entitled society. It's absolutely. I'm just listening to this. All these things you're saying. We are so entitled and fucking selfish. I hate it.
You have made me mad, so therefore I'm going to ruin.
This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to ruin our child's life and give them trauma, so they can trauma bond with somebody else when they get older and be fucked up because I'm mad at you and I don't like you.
Or I'm gonna give myself bruises and then call the cops.
Oh my God!
It's I hate you more than I love my child.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
Or even more than I love myself.
Yeah.
All right.
I think that's why I conduct myself the way that I do in my situation, because my parents separated when I was 15 and then divorced when I was 16 or 17. It took like a year and a half, 2 years for their divorce to go through. But my mother was on such a campaign prior to their separation, during the separation, and for probably a solid 2 decades after their divorce.
Wow, committed.
I mean, just my dad. The fact that my dad woke up and took a breath in the morning was just absolutely against God's law and
committed.
yeah. And the crazy thing is that, you know, I have a younger brother who's 3 years younger than I am, and it really, really affected my dad and my brother's relation. I mean, really affected it, until my brother was in his mid-30s and he was able to stop and decipher the bullshit.
Right.
Now, you know, of course, my mom would always peg my brother and I against each other. You know, well, you're your dad's favorite and you think your dad does no wrong. And I'm like, no, I see the wrong that he does. However, I also see what you're spinning, which is completely inaccurate to like what just happened. So I was able to have that discernment in the situation where my brother could not. But that is hands down the number one reason why I conduct myself the way that I do. Discernment. Do you want me to spell it?
No, okay. Don't you start that.
Okay.
Basso profundo.
All right, the next one. And this is, I'm curious if you even have dealt with this. Female judges, this is a study done by Indiana University. Female judges tend to impose harsher sentences than male judges.
On whom? On a specific parent or in
They
general?
were just in general.
Are we talking about like a criminal sentence, like in an abuse situation?
So
or?
this study was done on criminal, this wasn't a family. It was like a subcategory of this other study.
Okay.
And then I saw that. Yeah, I saw that. I went down the rabbit hole and I pulled that. I was like, whoa. That was curious.
Right.
So that, and I was reading, you know, I just took footnotes, but I was reading that, and it had to do with criminal cases.
In my experience in Northern Virginia, I have not found that's the case. I have found harsher sentences come from male judges towards alleged male abusers. Absolutely.
Oh, you're not gonna make us look bad, so we're gonna get your ass now. But I also got to think this. I always say this. You know, you got the three Virginias. You got West Virginia, Northern Virginia, and the rest of Virginia.
Right.
So, when you say Northern Virginia, I always wonder, like, or like DC or the greater metropolitan area. It just seems like we always talk about living in that bubble. I wonder if the judiciary, the people who are on the benches, aren't a little bit more, I don't want to say progressive, but progressive thinking or progressive.
Are you thinking because of where we are? Yeah,
because it's just I mean, we ain't got the quote. I don't think we just have in this area. We would never see the quote unquote hanging judge. You know, don't go see Judge Johnson.
I mean, there's just the reality of where we live is that there's just counties that are more conservative versus more liberal, and not to get in, and I don't mean that in a political way.
Sense.
No,
that's what I'm saying. I'm just saying in their way of thinking
in a way of life.
In a way of life. Like you might have a conservative bent or conservative leaning, but in your adjudication of the law,
right? Because you could commit the same crime in Prince William County that you do in Rockingham County, and get two completely different outcomes, literally because of the environment.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
Don't get the hanging Judge Roy.
Right.
No Judge Roy.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at Southern Virginia, I've never practiced in Southern Virginia. I don't know any of the judges down there, so forgive me, judges, if you hear this. I'm not speaking from experience. But I would venture to guess that they're going to have a different perspective on family law cases, on dads being primary caregivers of abuse, and maybe even more pro the male in an abuse situation. Yeah. I don't know that. But
I have a dear friend of mine who I was talking to her about, who is also a family attorney, but she's also a rotating judge in several counties in the Commonwealth. And I can tell you that she's pretty liberal, I think, and very fair in her stances. But her being a judge compared to being on the days that she has to be a practicing attorney versus the days that she has to be a judge, it's a different animal. I bet. Depending on the table that you're sitting at, it's a different animal.
That's a great way to put that.
She got a code switch based on her environment.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about custody real quick. Backtracking to custody, but I also want to talk about, in your opinion and everyone's opinions, about reasons why people get divorced in the first place.
Ooh.
Right?
You know the number one.
Hey, look, when I saw these stats, I was like, no, I don't agree with this. So let's talk about custody real quick. 65% of women get custody. You find that to be true?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily.
And we'll expand upon that in a second. So a study done by, and this might be a biased because it was done by a law firm, according to the Jensen law firm, they're in Minnesota.
Ooh.
The mother is always better suited to take care of the child's emotional needs. In contrast, families only need the father for financial contributions.
You know, and that's interesting. There, quite a few people do believe that. They do believe that the mother is more emotionally suited to care for the children. And I think where fathers make a misstep is even before divorce even gets on the table, even before the relationship falls apart. It's been my experience with my clients and seeing friends and family in various situations, the men don't take an active role in the child's upbringing.
Okay.
They don't I'm using generalities, but they're not as likely to be the one to take the kid to the pediatrician. They're not as likely to be the one who is making sure that the school lunch is packed for the field trip and making sure all the forms are filled out. The wife tends to, I've got this, I'll just go ahead and spearhead it. And they're like, oh, okay, all right, you do it. Well, then that's going to come around and bite you later on down the road if that marriage falls apart. And she's like, I've done everything. He doesn't even know who the kid's doctors are.
Dang.
And it's not that they don't love them. It's not that they're not capable of doing these things. They've always been like, oh, it's just easier for you to deal with it.
Yeah.
But isn't that a more of a a gender role kind of deal where,
or generational?
Well, it's so funny because that is totally not my experience. I'm sitting over here in my head thinking, thanks, Dad. You know, my dad was in the military. My dad always took me to the doctors, like when I got sick.
Okay, you're a little perfect.
Yeah, I am over here like
this
this.
white picket fence. Every podcast,
I'm listening.
Daddy was the perfect daddy. No, my dad was nice too.
Yeah, my dad did my lunches. My dad took me to school. Me and my dad went to private school, so me and my dad went to school together. I'm listening like this is crazy to me.
Yeah, my dad was a caveman, so
And it's funny y'all sitting there telling me, like,
my dad cooked breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
I hope my wife don't want to divorce me because I might be asked out. You know?
Are you a caveman, Keith?
No.
Going to the soccer games doesn't count.
You're right.
What else do you do?
I totally understand. Like, and it's not an excuse, but it is what it is. I work, as y'all know, I work different shifts, right? So she does all, and you have no idea how much greatly I appreciate it because I never worry about. Well, I worry about all of them physically because. Oh, God forbid anything.
So let's talk about, that leads me, and I'm going to ask you, and I don't need the details, right? Because
the deets.
You actually, Haran, got full custody of your son.
Yeah.
So obviously you're not a caveman, right? So you obviously got full custody, so you were completely involved in your son's upbringing. From when did you get? How old was he?
I did get full custody, but we kept it very cordial. You know what I mean? Like I didn't have him 5 days out of the week.
On paper.
On paper. It wasn't like that. It was just full custody on paper. At that time I was working in the restaurant, so it was tough, because I was my shifts were like from 2 to midnight. So when I get up in the morning, basically my son would be in school and then I have to go to work, and then my parents were really involved in helping, taking care of my son. But the reason why that happened, there's no other way but to tell it in detail. It got dirty in court, right? Because she was like, I'm the mother. I deserve to have him all the time, and she basically said you can come get him every other weekend, and that's it. And with my schedule, that was kind of where it was. But she wanted full custody, she wanted control, and I didn't want the fact that where she could say, you know what, you don't want to have him. If I can take him right now, and you can't have him. I just didn't want that. I just wanted what was fair. The reason why I got it was because of she's from Afghanistan. And it all happened right when 9/11 happened, right? And there was a lot of fear that she might take him back to Afghanistan, and there's there's a lot of stuff that was involved in that.
Haran Esquire leaned into that.
Yeah, I didn't even have a lawyer, so I represented myself, and that was really scary. I went to the courthouse and I filed for joint physical and joint legal custody, and basically,
and you beat a lawyer. You beat a lawyer.
I did, yeah, and she actually worked for a law firm. Good job. So she, I don't think she even paid her.
Associate.
Can I cut in? What's the difference between joint? What'd you say? Joint
physical
legal
and
joint
legal.
physical. There's a difference.
Yes.
I'll let Whitney explain.
Okay,
that.
you can do it afterwards. I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah.
I wanted the answer.
You want to finish your
Yeah, you
story?
finish your story.
Yeah, I forgot where I was at.
I'm sorry.
Went to the courthouse.
You beat the
filed.
attorney.
I beat the attorney, but I didn't have him 5 days a week, and she had him every other weekend. It was basically whatever our schedule worked out.
Right.
It worked out, and
You
I
just
was
had
very
the
fair.
legal access.
I just had it on paper where I had joint legal and physical custody. I mean, she didn't talk to me for years after that because she was so
But
pissed.
see, that's what I don't understand. Like, I don't want you to like. Here you are. It got nasty, right?
It got really nasty.
But it did. But then as soon as it's over, you still worked with each other's schedules, right? But see, that's like what? Why in the hell are we people getting to that point? Just stop it before it gets to the net. I don't.
Nobody wants to lose.
That's so stupid. You've already lost.
But the people are entitled and selfish.
And the only people that should be. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying everybody wants what they want. Yeah. I want what I want, you want what you want. I want to have what you want, what you don't want me to have, and vice versa.
Yeah, when your emotions get
All I'm
involved,
gonna say
it's
is
hard to really rationalize, what the best interest of the children is.
My kids did not ask to be born.
And I'm not a mom, and that's for a lot of reasons, and one of them is because I don't want to love anything that much, but I can only imagine
What you do.
I mean, I don't know.
On paper. It's all on paper.
And what about us? You love us that much.
But if you carry this baby inside you, and it's like you're so attached to it, so I can see where moms get a little, I'm going to use the word crazy, and probably someone's going to say something horrible in the comments. But yeah, you get a little crazy about it, right? Because it was like inside you, and it was like it's your child.
Part of you.
You nurtured this, so then you're so afraid that this
Well, let me give you the
dad, who should also be entitled because it's also his, but like I think it probably some kind of chemical stuff happens there.
With parenting, I understand. I totally get the mother, the matronly part of that, but speak from the fatherly part of it. Like mentally, I lose it when it comes to
we know.
I hate to say it. I went outside last week and went the fuck off on a bunch of kids because one of them said something about my son, and I went the fuck off.
Yeah, but you're crazy. So.
Yeah, I am. It's partial, but we're not gonna talk about Uncle Sam will take
PTSD, military.
You got your military
Uncle Sam will take care
PTSD,
of it. But I was like get the fuck out of here. You didn't. I'm not even gonna get into it because it was pretty ridiculous. What
Did you confess a crime on podcast?
I don't give a shit when it comes.
Hey.
That's what I'm saying. When it comes to my kids.
I almost went up to my daughter's school 3 weeks ago and pretended to be a 13-year-old. So,
Yeah.
Another reason I'm not a parent, because I think
it.
I would get, very tiger mom. Like, I'm already very protective of my friends, family,
I'm curious, and y'all can walk me through this thought. And I'm from a different society. I was born in Jamaica. You're from Sri Lanka.
We're going to mention it.
You're from Sri Lanka, right? So
He was born here.
it's
he was
different.
raised.
It's
No, I'm kidding.
It's different though. Eastern society and Western society is different. Marriage is different. It's the family.
The divorce rate is a lot less.
The family bond is different. I was talking to somebody about. I went to a party. The owner of Paisanos had a party a couple of weeks ago, in a big ass house, and we called it a mansion party, me and my friend. So we went. There were nothing but millionaires there, doctors, lawyers. So I got into a conversation with this doctor, and he was a little tipsy, and the alcohol was running. So we were talking. He overheard me talking about Gaddafi and stuff like that. He was a Gaddafi. So
Shit.
we got into it. We started talking. So. And I said, I told him, I was like, I'm from a different culture. He's from a different culture. And he doesn't, people from the West find it hard to believe that when your parents get old, the parents get sent to a home, all these retirement homes, right? But in the East and everywhere else in the world, when your parent gets old, they don't go to a home. They come and live with one of the kids, right? And whether they come live with the son, they come live with. In other societies, the son or the daughter lives in their parents' home until they find a family of their own. Versus in this country, when you're 18, get the fuck out of my house. So. That's to me, and then that long speech, right? But my question is, do you find that's the breakdown in the family structure here in the West, where it's it's not a family unit. It's a bunch of individuals that happen to be related to each other.
Sheer blood.
I think that's actually accurate. I mean, I'm from the South, and I come from a, smack dab in the middle of the Bible Belt, and a very hyper-religious area. And it's still viewed from a very, very traditional. You do take care of the parents. You do take care of, you don't kick your kids out at 18, the woman is more submissive. The woman needs to be the homemaker. The woman needs to assume this role. The husband needs, and divorce.
Not an option.
And
frowned upon, I would say.
Right. Even in cases of abuse, even in cases of, adultery, even in cases.
Well, God doesn't give you more than you can handle. So.
Right. And you're not praying.
Don't start. I almost started. Don't you start.
Five, baby.
You're not praying hard enough for him. You need to look at yourself and work on yourself. And, it's just, they're unwilling to walk away from going, you know what, maybe we made a mistake. Maybe we don't need to sacrifice the rest of our lives here and, move
When
on.
did that change happen in your thought process?
I never bought into that.
That's why she left.
I never bought into that.
That's why she
If I could just interject, I think it's also not just Western, Eastern, foreign, whatever. I think it's city versus country. Like, people run away to cities because it's going to be more individualistic. It's more, whether it's pursuing your,
more freedom,
dreams of the arts, just more freedom in general. Whether it's that you can't come out if you're gay in your small town, so you go to the coasts in America, right?
Goodness.
Because everything. You got the West Coast, you got the East Coast, and everything in between probably leans more toward, like, other, traditional countries. But same thing even in Hungary, right? Like, my mom left her small town of, like, 800 people and moved to Budapest, which is a lot more metropolitan, a lot more freedoms. She had a master's degree, all of that stuff, because that's what she wanted. Her sister stayed there, like, more on their farm. And, I mean, she had her own pub and all this stuff, but it's just different lifestyles, and I think it's more of like urban versus like not even suburban, but like kind of rural country.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Is that kind of like we were talking about earlier?
And in rural society also, it's more important for the family to stay together. You may have a farm, you may have a family business, you may have all these things where you can't really separate
the family's committed to each other for the success of the family.
And you don't have access to resources
that
you're going to have in the city.
And that leads me to a question that I want to ask, because part of what you're saying is that if you don't know better, you don't do better. So access to information is a big thing, because if you were stuck in the Bible Belt and you were pounded with religion all this time, and you stayed with your spouse for better or for worse, right? So if you don't know better, you don't do better. But you as a child, your thought process changed. Did you have access to information?
My father and my mother was a hyper-religious person. And when I say hyper-religious, I was in that church every time the doors were open. It was not an option. My dad, not religious, enjoyed reading books on Islam, books on Buddhism, books on Hinduism. I mean, he was Judaism. He didn't buy into any particular path.
How did that work out?
It was a very bizarre situation to live in. And at his funeral, my mom had the preacher of her church come and talk, and he gives this very long Christian sermon, and I'm thinking, Daddy would have hated this. Right. Oh my God. He's probably
funerals are
cringing
for the
somewhere.
living.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when did that change happen for you, though? Because you said you didn't buy into it, so you had to be access to something
from an early age. I mean, I was very much my father's daughter,
sounds like Dad influenced you a lot more.
Absolutely. And I saw so much, and not to get into religion and diss any religion or whatever, but where I grew up, and in my experience, I saw so much hypocrisy. And I saw it. I saw it on the surface. I couldn't understand why my mom couldn't see it. I couldn't understand why the other people at church couldn't see it. This just didn't make sense. I'm 8 years old going,
You're right.
Look,
It's right
you
there.
know?
It's right there.
And I just couldn't process it. But I did have my dad, so he showed me that there is another side to that. And I still look back at people that I knew growing up, and it's a free country. You believe whatever you want to believe, as long as you don't hurt anybody. I don't care. But I look back at them, and they're still headstrong into these beliefs, and I'm like, wow, you still don't see it. You still don't see.
But what's
I
funny?
don't know if they don't see it or if they just choose to ignore it.
Cognitive dissonance,
Yeah.
completely
Could be.
clearly.
But it's funny though. You just said that they, their stronghold to believe these things, right? To make but it's weird that the divorce rate is so high. So you can be stronghold to believe these things, but you can't be stronghold to work through your marriage. And don't get me wrong, I understand there's some marriages absolutely need to be dissolved.
Right.
But I'm talking about the ones with I hate to say it this way, but the bullshit reasons. Mm-hmm. It's just fun. It's almost
What's a bullshit reason?
Well,
he wasn't nice to me this year.
yeah, don't get me wrong. Obviously, if there's abuse in the marriage, that's not even on the table. But some things can be worked out. A lot of times, I believe, I can, I see. I mean, I'm just like you said, I can see it. A lot of times, it's not necessarily the other person. A lot of times, it's me. It's the other person.
Does everybody have a non-negotiable as far as their breaking point in relationships or even in marriage?
Absolutely. If you hit me, you might not see it tomorrow. So yes.
Yeah, I think
I can do cheating, but if
abuse.
you hit me,
I think abuse is
Yeah.
one of my non-negotiables.
Yeah.
No question.
I think abuse is one of my non-negotiables.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to slap somebody to get them just to refocus. They're getting hysterical. No, I'm just kidding.
You gotta sleep with one eye open. Sleep with one eye open.
Mine
What's
is
love got to do with it?
What's love? Oh, that's Tina. Wow. Speaking of wow.
I did that for a reason.
For me, it's like
was
isolation. If they try to isolate you from your friends,
But that's abuse.
your family. Yeah, well,
That's another form of
but
another
I'm just
form of
saying
abuse,
very
yeah.
specifically.
yeah, absolutely.
If they try to isolate you from your friends and stuff.
Yeah, I just think I mean that's just like the first sign.
Well, that's the
Things
first sign because it's gonna
Yeah,
that
you know what
control
I mean?
that
So,
controlling
yeah.
is gonna go.
It's something.
It's
Yeah.
gonna get. It's gonna get. It's
That's
gonna
what I'm
get a
saying.
lot
But
deeper.
other things are really and truly, like people always like one of the highest numbers they say statistically is finances, right?